Now let's hear more about the situation in Syria and whether the power change could give rise to radical Islam again. We bring in Michele Rigby Assad. She is a former CIA intelligence officer and the author of Get Off the X, her new book that comes out in January. Good morning, Michele. Good to have you on the show. So to continue what we just heard, it looks like the biggest worry right now for the U.S. is that ISIS could exploit the situation in Syria. What do you see there? What kind of risk do you see there?
I see significant risk, and that's because the Assad family has been in control of Syria for over 50 years, leaving a huge power vacuum. And the coalition that's taken over Syria and removed him from power, led by Giuliani, have been trying to remake who they are and rebrand themselves as more moderate. And the reason why Giuliani has to do that is because he has to take power, consolidate power and control over this broken country. But it's really important to look at what he's doing versus his words. So he's claiming he's moderate, but just a few days ago he welcomed an Egyptian who's been sentenced to death for the assassination of the top prosecutor in Egypt in 2015. So this is giving huge cause to Arab leadership to be very concerned about what he's going to do as he consolidates control. He has the same ideology now as he had all these years ago. And so he's really kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing.
That's a very interesting point that you make, and I want to touch on that a little bit later again. First, let's talk about the power vacuum. Can you tell me a bit more about that and what you're referring to? Because as in right now, the situation in Syria, it sounds like, there is the HTS and Mohammed al-Bashir was named caretaker prime minister. And now there is a ceasefire in the north. U.S. and some other Western powers have actually also made direct contact with the HTS. So would power vacuum, is that still as much the case as it was in the beginning?
Oh, absolutely. What you have is you don't have a well-developed society because Bashar controlled everything in a police state. So when you have a police state, an authoritarian regime, you don't have these balance of powers. You have anybody who raised their head as being a potential leader who could be a problem for Bashar. They removed, they tortured, they threw into prison. So in other words, you've got an entire society that's extremely broken, extremely traumatized from Bashar al-Assad and his family's actions over the years. And so what Giuliani and the coalition is doing is having to take control of resources and rebuild Syria. So they have to show themselves as moderates in order to do that without a significant challenge to their role.
Now, there are a lot of different factions inside Syria. How about the extent of ISIS or other radical groups that could take advantage from the power change as well? And I know for ISIS, I've read that some analysts are actually worried about a resurgence in the entire region and not just Syria alone.
Absolutely. So the problem is I think people get very confused because a lot of these groups use different names. But at the end of the day, Giuliani has been a member of various groups and they share the same ideology. So ISIS is the same as Giuliani, is the same as Tahrir al-Sham. They are all the same. So essentially, they're trying to remake themselves as more moderates, but indeed they could become a base of instability, which Syria has been throughout the years since the war in Iraq. They served as a base for foreign fighters flowing into Iraq, and the entire Arab world is very concerned that that could become the case again.
So you just touched on it a little bit. Let's talk about it more. So the HTS, they're still actually pushing this message of unity and an inclusive government. And we know that they had taken power in Idlib since 2017. So does their ruling there give us any good indication of what it could look like in Syria?
Yes, it gives us very good indication, and it's not a good one. What we're going to see is an erosion of women's rights. We're going to see, Syria is a very well-educated people, and the women have worked and been very free. But what you're going to see, based on what Giuliani and his cohorts did in Idlib, is that you start eroding the power of civilian groups and women, and you cut back on their education and their ability to move around the country, and you start very carefully and gradually introducing more and more controls over people that are really established by their very extreme ideology.
So we also have, since we just talked about the different factions, we also have the Kurdish forces that are inside Syria still. So do you see hope that the country could be united in the future?
I don't, unfortunately. I wish I could say otherwise, but the Turkish government trained Giuliani and a lot of his coalition forces, and the Turkish government hates the Kurds. So I believe that the coalition is going to turn on the Kurds, and the Kurds are going to be in trouble.
Got it. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but it's such an interesting topic and so very important right now. But thank you so much, Michele Rigby Assad, for giving us your insights this morning. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Evelyn.